cartoons. Years ago, when Hanna-Barbera first put their cartoons out on videotape, this was back in the days of beta, I was hired to pick the cartoons that would go on the first tape. And I did it from memory, because that's how much Hanna-Barbera meant to me. And I remember sitting down in the basement of Hanna-Barbera watching the films on the Moviola to make sure they were as good as I remember. And Don Messick stopped by, he saw me there, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm working. I'm being paid to watch Hanna-Barbera cartoons." And that was to me one of the thrilling moments of my life. And the cartoons I was picking were made by these gentlemen. They didn't make them all by themselves, but they were some of the key people in doing this work for Hanna-Barbera. Let me introduce you to Mr. Jerry Eisenberg, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Tony Benedict. And I'm going to get back to them. Let me introduce, and this gentleman is Mr. Wally Burr. Now, Jerry was one of the key designers of Hanna-Barbera cartoons over the years. Tell them the names of some of the characters they know, and get close to the mic, Jerry, if you would. Tell us the name of some of the characters that you designed for Hanna-Barbera. Just name some characters.
Peter Potamus, Precious Pup, the Banana Splits, a lot of the Wacky Races. Oh gosh, I forget. Peter Puck.
Connection with MGM.
And shows,
Wally, I'm trying to talk here.
No, I'm trying to connect you.
Oh.
And shows you worked on. Just pick out, what was the first show you worked on for Hanna-Barbera?
Probably it was, they were still doing shorts. It was Snagglepuss, Pixie and Dixie. They were a lot of fun. And then there was the Flintstones. My favorite was the Jetsons. And Tony's storyboard scripts were the best.
Okay. And
I get to talk.
You get to talk some more, okay? And you worked on almost everything Hanna-Barbera did for how many years?
Well, from about 1961 to 75. I left for a few years, and I came back and left again, and then I came back again in the late 80s.
And when Jerry was started off there, he wasn't the best designer in the building because his father was. His father was one of the. Tell him about your father.
Well, he worked with Joe Barbera and Bill Hanna at MGM, starting in probably 1939 or so. And then he left to do comic books in about 1945. But Joe used to call him once in a while when he started out in 57 to help him with development projects. And I remember he did a storyboard for the Yogi Bear birthday special. And he's the one who gave Joe the seed concept, which became the Flintstones. He was having lunch with Joe, and he and Alan Dinehart were showing him artwork for animated Honeymooners, but none of the networks were interested. And my father said, well, why don't you put him in the Stone Age and put skins on him and give him a baby dinosaur and so on. It was like the seed concept, and they ended up developing it, and I don't know who thought of the name Flintstone. Originally it was Flagstones, but the Flagstone Quarry Company just objected to that, so they changed it to Flintstone, which I think turned out to be better. And it was Alan Dinehart that told me, well, there's a lot more, but I don't want to go into the whole story.
Alan was a writer and a voice director for the studio for years. Jerry's father was named Harvey Eisenberg. He drew almost all of the Tom and Jerry comic books for the 40s and 50s. And
he did a lot of Disney comics.
He did a lot of the Hanna-Barbera comic books. He storyboarded the very first episode of Top Cat. And,
I didn't remember that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, wonderful artist. Tony, take off a list of shows you worked on. Give us just list a bunch of shows that you wrote for Hanna-Barbera.
Well, let's see. Flintstones, Jetsons, Top Cat, some Huckleberry Hounds, the Space Cadets. I don't remember, but I seem to have worked on everything. It just kept coming by. There's hardly a
of the first 26 Jetsons, how many did you write? Of the classic
maybe
26
a third.
About
a third of the 27. What did they do the first year? The only year.
We did 24, or was it 30?
It wasn't like a 13 episode they would sign for, like 22 or 3. So I did maybe 6 or 7 of those early ones.
And you wrote about a third of the Top Cat, Salt Top Cat?
Yeah.
And we went back. We went back and we looked and we figured out that Tony wrote all our favorite episodes of all those shows. You introduced Rosie the Robot into the Jetsons, right?
No, I wish I had, but no,
But you did.
I didn't.
All right.
First, Astro was my character.
Oh, Astro, that's right. I meant
Yeah,
Astro. Okay, yeah.
I did the coming of Astro the first time when he followed Elroy home. Elroy dragged him, sort of. And it turned out that this dog was owned by a wealthy businessman, and he wanted them back. And they went to, the dog didn't want to go. So they went to court, and it resolved itself, and Astro wound up with the Jetson.
How many people here can tell me what Astro's name was before it was Troufaz?
Troufaz was a name that Mike Maltese actually used a lot. That's where it came from. And when I first came to Hanna-Barbera, there was just Mike Maltese and Warren Foster. They were staff writers. It was a very small industry those days. Maybe in our studio, only 150 people, and most of them were inkers and painters. But Mike and Warren wrote incredibly great and numerous cartoons, and they would do it all themselves. And of course, we had to draw cartoons. We went straight to a storyboard. We didn't have a script, and there was no approval process, the lengthy processes that exist now. I would have an idea, bring it into Joe, pitch it to him. He'd like it or not. If he did, maybe make a change or two, but say, okay, go back, and then I'd rough out a storyboard, bring it back to him, a few more changes, go back, make those changes. He took it to the network, and they put it into production. The networks took very little interest in scrutinizing all the scripts we did in those days. 20 years later, when I came back to do the new Jetsons, I had to run through a gauntlet of 10 or 12 levels of approval, standards and practices and various advertising concerns and so forth and so on. So the real great fun of Hanna-Barbera in the early days was that it was small, and it was just like it wasn't a big corporation. Just Bill and Joe. Bill ran the production. Joe did the creative end of it, and that was a simple, easy, wonderful life.
Tell them where you were before you were at Hanna-Barbera.
I got into the cartoon business after I was in the Marine Corps, and I didn't know what to do next because I had two choices. I had been a boxer on the Marine Corps boxing team, and I had a chance to turn pro, and that sounded like a lot of fun. But I also liked to draw because I was on the base paper, and I would do cartoons every week. So I sent them to Disney, asking for a job. I can be a fighter, or I can be a cartooner. Both using the same hand. And so I thought I was going to have to be a fighter, but I got a thing from a letter from Disney Studios, and I still have it. And I drove out there in a 1949 Studebaker from Cherry Point, North Carolina, to Hollywood, California. Pulled up on the lot, the Burbank lot, and the guy said, "Oh, I had an appointment to be interviewed." He said, "Well, and while you're doing that, take your car over to the gas station. They'll fill it full of gas and so forth, and when you come out, I'll be all right." Wow, never got that kind of treatment in the Marines. So I went in, started out as an apprentice animator in a animation training class, and wound up in a Bob McRae's unit, which was a unit that took old Disney animation, which they would pull up from the morgues, the actual pages, and we would take drawings from there and repurpose them. It's a term that came later, but this was the first time we ever used old material for the new Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. So I learned a great deal about animation, learned how to animate and how to pose, and also how to reuse material, which came in very handy at Hanna-Barbera. From then there was a layoff. I thought, wow, this would never end, but I learned about layoffs, and but I still got a gig over at UPA because I was, low income, bottom of the line, but I was well trained. So at UPA, I submitted some stories for Mr. Magoo. Abe Levitow was the producer director then. He gave me a shot, and I wrote some Magoos for a TV show that they had with Mr. Magoo. And then Hanna-Barbera was cranking up. And a live action writer, a friend of mine, Phil Babbitt, anyone's ever heard of Phil? Phil was, he wanted to write Flintstones. Because the Flintstones were just starting up. They hadn't even had the first season yet. We were just doing them. So he and I put a script together, and I did some drawings that accompanied it, and we submitted to Alan Dinehart at Hanna-Barbera. Well, they hired me, and I didn't hire Phil, because I had animation training, and so that's how I got started there. Alan introduced me to Joe Barbera, and that was the beginning of my career.
Wally, tell us what brought you to Hanna-Barbera. What were you doing before you first set foot there?
I started as an announcer in Chicago. Eventually migrated to Los Angeles and was doing Kellogg's commercials, many of which were animated. And Bill Hanna was supervising. Bill ran the studio, the business end of it. Joe went to New York, threw up storyboards on the walls and sold the shows. So it's kind of interesting what they were great compliments to each other. But he was asking me where I came from. I came from an advertising agency. It's still a very well-known, its name is Leo Burnett Advertising, Marlboro, Kellogg's. A good friend of mine invented the Pillsbury Doughboy. That's a story in itself. There's so many stories in this business that I want to say one thing is kind of off of what you just asked about, Mark. But writing is not given the guys who come up with the original ideas. The rest of us meddle with it. We mold it. We kick it around and say, "Oh, I don't like that. I'm going to change it." We better talk to the writer. The writers are the guys who come up with the gold, and I mean it. It ought to be a 5 or 6 writers up here. Mark, I've said I can write dialogue, but I don't know anything about structure. Structure is the story, the arc, the feeling. It's the real basis of the story, and the guys who do that, then the rest of us come along and start screwing it up. But I do. I've never been on a panel yet when I didn't try to acknowledge the talent, the gold that is the writer. And it's not, I don't think is interesting. You know, it's interesting. The actors come up. Actors have done, what, 4 hours in any given episode of a show. Writers, producers, animators, the rest of them have probably put in 40-hour weeks on the same thing that the actors did for 4 hours. And yet the actors are the most interesting to the general public. And they're the most fascinating personalities. Most of us are kind of dead and dumb when we get up here. But I started in advertising, transitioned, got to know Bill Hanna. Bill Hanna said, "Would you come to the studio?" I couldn't sell simplified animation to advertising agencies, and I eventually said, "You've seen me voice direct. I want to start doing that with you." And he pulled me over into that end of it, and I went on and I've been doing that for a long, long time. Transformers, G.I. Joe. How many of you know of Jem and the Holograms? It's a girls' show, and probably one of the most enjoyable shows I ever did. We had 6 bad girls and 6 good girls, and they're all still around, and I still hear from them, and I never hit on any of them. It was a fun thing to do. A gal by the name of Christy Marks, writers again. Christy Marks wrote the best guy dialogue. She wrote some of the G.I. Joes and some of the Transformers, and was the story editor, which is the person who says, yes, this is right, this is on the mark for the story. Christy Marks wrote and was the story editor on Jim and the Holograms. But again, the writing, and you guys are not as interested in writers as you are in actors. And actors are more fun. They get up here and clown around a lot, and we go stumbling through, what did you do? Anyway, that's how I ended up at Hanna-Barbera. I came out of the advertising business and faked my way into, and Joe looked at me as though, you don't have a portfolio, do you? A portfolio is what an artist brings in and shows his artwork. I'm without portfolio. I can doodle, but I enjoyed working with the actors. And I had come from being a commercial director eventually in Chicago for a while before I went to the advertising agency. So, announcing, ad agency, Los Angeles, Hanna-Barbera, eventually into stuff that was labeled as being Marvel material.
So now, what was your first Hanna-Barbera job? You were doing commercials for them first?
First what?
First for Hanna-Barbera, your first job for Hanna-Barbera.
The one I remember the most, I think, is Super Friends, which has become another...
Which had a pretty big cast.
Yeah. Big cast was all the G.I. Joe's Transformers. They were selling these toys, so we had as many as 18 characters in the show.
All right. What was the first thing you did for Hanna-Barbera? What was the first show you did for them? Do you know?
Joe was going to be in New York, and Bill said he wants you to do the Flintstones. Hey, that's his stuff. I don't touch that. And so I had, who was Harvey Korman. He played a kazoo. Does anybody remember the name of the character?
Great Kazoo.
Yes.
Great Kazoo.
Anyhow, I was told he would be the guest artist, and he was hot. He was right out of whose show?
Carol Burnett.
Carol Burnett, thank you. What's my name?
At the time, Harvey Korman was doing the Danny Kaye show.
Right.
At the time.
Oh yeah, all right. Anyhow, that was a check because Joe had at that time, up to that time, he had always said, I do that show, and I got to do that as one of the first shows I did. Went on to do, I only did, I think, 3 episodes. One with Harvey Korman, and that's the only celebrity. Worked with Mel Blanc a lot on the little guy that came out of an iceberg, had been frozen for.
Captain America?
Anybody remember?
Captain Caveman.
Yes, Captain Caveman! And I told Mel when he came in, he said, am I going to have to do this every show? I said, no, we're going to do about 4 or 5, maybe 10 takes on it. We'll stick it on the shelf, and when you yell, Captain Caveman, we'll just reach for the shelf. And Mel was an interesting guy to work with. He kind of the truth of it is, after he had his accident, there's a corner, Sunset Boulevard, out in Beverly Hills, where he ran his Porsche off the road, and I think he was in great deal of pain after that. And the first sessions that were done after he had this accident, we took equipment out, put it in over his bed, and he was recovering from this accident, and did Barney with a mic hung over his bed. And then he gradually recovered, and I don't think ever fully recovered. I think I didn't have him go to sleep on me, but I think part of that was the amount of pain he was in. He was very difficult to perform and to be happy when he was hurting all over. So, but Mel was what, the man of 1,000 or maybe 10,000 voices. Any other questions?
No, let me ask Tony. Tony, you had an advantage when you were writing shows. You had fabulous actors. You had Dawes Butler and Don Messick and Gene Vanderpyle and you know, these Doug Young and all these wonderful actors.
Yeah, they made us writers look good. Really, the actors, we knew the actors, we knew what they could do, and they would do it and then add to it. They were all so expert at what they did. I love hearing my stuff come out of them.
And you had wonderful layout people and wonderful storyboard artists and everybody else working with you, and designers and animators and things like that.
Well, you know, it was in 1957, the animation business was very depressed. The major studios had stopped making animated cartoons, shorts. Disney was the only one. And Hanna-Barbera had this new way of making films at a decent price. And so they sucked up all the best talent in the industry. They're all concentrated in that one place on Coinga Boulevard. And that, I think, was as much talent as I've ever seen together in one spot in my entire life. And it was easy to get shows. They sailed through. Hannah would just, everybody knew how to do their job, and they loved it. We were all working, making more money than we ever had before. So it was a real cartoon, what do we call it, honeymoon.
It was a wonderful. Now let me stop here. I'm going to ask the technician in the back, did we ever get that video working? Can we run it now? Tony brought a video of some footage from Hanna-Barbera. This is, you want to introduce this?
Jerry and I would walk around with cameras, shooting pictures, which you couldn't do in the studio today.
Movie films. So.
Yeah, and it was zero security. So we have put a lot of it together, and it's being put into a sort of a mockumentary, because it has a lot of humor. It has animation. We've animated Bill and Joe, and what you're going to see now is just a work in progress, but it just gives you the flavor of the studio in those days. So.
Great. Okay, can we roll this? This is Tony's compilation of some samples of some of the things he's put together to tell us what Hanna-Barbera was like in this golden era.
So I have to wait till it's over to talk again?
Yes, you do. But you'll talk plenty afterwards.
You want to talk as much as Wally.
You can do the rebuttal.
Listen to your demo tape. I think it was excellent.
That's great. Jerry, now, when I went to work for Hanna-Barbera, which was in the mid-70s, it didn't seem like that fun a place to work all the time. But you had it, when you were there, it was a fun place.
It was. Oh, the 60s were great. Yeah.
Tell us, do you remember any part of them at all?
But I was going to say, when Wally was talking about the writers, I agree with a lot of that, but sometimes some of us cartoonists would create a character, just make a doodle, and then Joe would get the writers together and we'd develop it.
Can you give us an example of that, where you doodled something?
Peter Potamus.
Okay.
I think Ruby Spears kind of did that, didn't they, by creating characters and saying, hey, let's expand on that.
You saw in that film, one of the film editors was a man named Ken Spears, who later went on to be part of the Ruby Spears studio, and that's where Jerry worked for a while. Jerry worked on, when Ruby Spears was producing shows, he was the producer of Plastic Man, and Fang Face, and Thunder the Barbarian, and quite a few shows for them.
Well, Fang Face was a character that I created because we were developing an idea with Wolfman Jack, the disc jockey, and nothing really developed, but I was looking for some photographs of Wolfman. I had to make some caricatures of him. And I saw one photo at the store. He was kneeling down with his arm on the back of a stuffed wolf. And I thought, hey, why don't we put a wolf dog or, you know, werewolf in the show? So I designed something, and we ended up, we didn't do anything with Wolfman, but we took my design of this werewolf, and it became Fang Face. I don't remember who came up with the name.
Okay.
Did anybody see Fang Face?
There was never a Hanna-Barbera show that didn't have a dog in it, or a wolf.
That's right.
Yes.
Did you give him a left hook?
Anyway, so but tell us about how much time during the day did you spend actually drawing when you were there, and how much did you spend flirting with secretaries?
I was lucky. I could draw very fast, so it gave me a lot of extra time for secretaries and lunches and stuff like that.
Why don't you ask somebody who'll tell the truth?
Now tell us about Joe and Bill. Let's talk about how were they to work for?
Oh, I worked mostly for Joe because he handled the layout department and the writers were his departments. And he was great. He was quite an inspiration.
He was a very charming man. He was a very good talker. There's a famous story. Joe Barbera went in to pitch a show at the network, and he had all these different ideas. And he's pitching on this show, and this idea, and this idea, and this idea, and this idea. And he had an agent who would go with him all the time.
Cy Fisher?
Cy Fisher. And Cy Fisher would just sit there and giggle whatever Joe pitched. And that was a good agent, just sits there and laughs. And finally the network says, okay, we'll buy 2 hours. This is a great, we'll buy it. Okay. And they walked out of the office, and Joe turned to Cy and said, which of the ideas did they buy? And Cy said, I don't know. and so Joe said, we should go back in and find out what they bought. And Cy said, no, we signed the contract. Then we go back in and find out what we sold them. So the next day, Cy Fisher gets a call from the network people. And they said, look, we're going to honor the commitment, but we're not sure what we committed to. What were the shows that we did? And they didn't know. Nobody knew what they bought. Joe had actually sold nothing. Anyway, so for those who don't understand, explain what Joe did and what Bill did, how they divided up the workload.
Well, like Wally said, Bill pretty much ran the studio as far as the camera department, the animators, ink and paint. Joe, he ran the creative side of the studio.
He hired and fired the writers.
Right.
It would start with development. That would last about 6 months, and then after he sold some shows, we'd go into production for 6 months, then back to development.
Okay, and your role during most of this time was design, layout. Tell me what you did.
Well,
What did you do all day to justify this salary of yours?
Well, I used to tell Joe how great he was. I was a layout man for a number of years, and also character design was my specialty. And course, I should mention Iwo Takamoto, who is no longer with us. He and I designed quite a lot of characters for Hanna-Barbera. And I left just before you came in. I left in '75 to help Ruby Spears start their studio.
And then I worked for Ruby Spears.
And you worked with
Hanna-Barbera, yes.
That's what we
Yeah,
did.
that's right. Anyway, and the first time I mentioned, you couldn't believe I knew who your father was.
You didn't, or did
You didn't, I knew, and you didn't know that you were surprised I knew who he was. And Jerry was the fastest artist I ever saw at drawing things. He would like wait, if they needed the drawing at 2 o'clock, he would start it at 1:58. and it would be done early.
I was lucky.
What was your favorite show? What were your favorite shows to work on in Hanna-Barbera?
Well, doing layouts and design for the Jetsons, I think that was my #1 favorite. And the Flintstones. And I liked the shorts until we stopped doing those.
One of the things you worked on that I liked tremendously was a movie called Hey There, It's Yogi Bear,
Oh,
which
yeah.
you designed a lot of.
Yeah. Iwo and I worked on Joe put us on a song sequence. I think it was called the St. Louis Bears or something.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of fun with that.
Tony, what was your favorite show to work on?
Jetsons by far.
Okay, we seem to have a consensus building here.
It was great sitting around just thinking what the future would be like. And we had Skype, wireless communication, flat panel, big screens, and a lot of stuff that they haven't caught up with us yet.
Oh, you know, when we were developing the Jetsons, Tony, this was 1962, and Tony brought in a book. The title was 1975, and it just had all kinds of predictions and stuff in it. That was I finally found a copy of that a few years ago.
Wally, let me name some actors that you directed. Tell me if these spark any memories for you, okay? You worked with...
4 of the people up here, I gave Greg Berger his first gig for Deep Productions and hired him to play a gentle character. And then I cast him again in, what was the Transformer character?
Grimlock. Grimlock.
Yeah, me Grimlock.
Yeah.
I did voices once for a while. I did the Bunny Graph in Chicago for an advertiser who had a guy wandering around in a bear's, or rather in a bunny suit, and at the navel there was a lens that stuck out. So the kids didn't know they were being photographed. So I came up with a voice like this for the Bunny Graph, and I don't think it's very bad. It is the first one I ever did. Can I have a hand for the Bunny Graph?
Tell us about some of your favorite actors who worked, like Frank Welker. You worked with Frank on all.
Frank Welker is, you want me to talk about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably the most gentlemanly person in the business. He does not come to conventions. I think you have to put him in chains to come into public events. And I don't think he enjoys being lauded. The rest of us do. We got people laughing at what we say and enjoying us as personalities. But Frank does not. Frank is probably the wealthiest single individual in voiceover. Scooby Doo. Who's the kid behind the white bread kid?
Fred.
The character name.
Fred.
Fred. All right. He still does that character. He also did the Claw in Inspector Gadget. You remember it was down in there like that. It used to amaze me that Frank had a range, infinite range, vocally. Sweet guy. One day in the studio, I came in getting ready for a session, and there was a riser, that is a step, where you step down from one place. And Frank was down there, and to be polite, he kind of got up so he'd be at the same level talking with me. So I then decided it'd be kind of fun to sit down, and he'd have to sit down. And as soon as he sat down, I stood up. And pretty soon he said, "What are you doing with me? You're playing with my head." Yeah, Frank is an extremely talented person, and probably not as well known as a lot of other individuals, but probably is as well off as anybody who's ever faced a microphone. He has a rule, he doesn't work Thursdays and Fridays, or Saturdays and Sundays, so that he can fly his airplane around, and just an extremely nice gentleman. He was stand-up. That was where he started the business. And Mort Saul used him as the lead-in to warm up the audience. I don't know, how many know who Mort Saul was? Yeah, about 8 of you. Excuse me, I'll try to be more contemporary. But that's Frank, the most amazing guy in the voice business. I think as amazing, if you really knew the statistics, as Mel Blanc.
Oh boy.
One of the most amazing voice guys I got to work with was Don Messick, who was the voice of Scooby Doo. Frank Welker is now the voice of Scooby Doo.
Kind of a same team. Dawes Butler and Don Messick were almost always paired. They created Jellystone Park. Joe got on me once, Mr. Barbera got on me once. He said, move Dawes along, he's slowing down a little bit. And we had a thing called Laugh Olympics, which was basically a race show. It was not racial, but a show about races. And I started to do what Joe had said, move him along. And I said to Dawes, the point of this show is not so much your personalities as it is a race. The score comes up, who's ahead and who's behind. So I want to move the tempo a little bit. And he I could see he was kind of wrinkled by that. Monday morning, after my having chastised him about his tempo, I got a 5-page letter handwritten from him how I was destroying the somewhat languid, laconic characters of Huck and Huckleberry, Huck and who was it? Yogi. Anyhow, I didn't know how to have. Then he went back and told Joe I was kicking his butt too much, and he was not happy with my having pushed him on the tempo. But there I was between. Joe had said push him. He comes back to Joe and says, "Hey, he's leading on me." We repaired that little bit of disagreement. But I tried to convince Dawes that the show was more important than just his character. So there are a few characters there I remember working with. One other, and Hong Kong Phooey.
Yeah, Scatman.
That was, help me.
Scatman Crothers.
He was in The Shining.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And as a live action actor. Anyway, he did Hong Kong Phooey and later on Jazz, the character of Jazz in Transformers. And he passed away in the middle of one of the episodes of it. And we had 3 more that he was written into. So I started doing this character like that. And I kind of was a little afraid somebody might not like that thing, and I was imitating the black man. And I did 3 episodes and then kind of forgot about it, and nobody ever noticed it, so I was kind of pleased. Scatman was a lovely person to work with. Kind of a fun thing about working with him on jokes. He had a great sense of comedy, but he didn't know the rhythm. All jokes have the rhythm. They go ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba, or ba-ba-ba-ba-boom, whatever. And he'd say the joke, and I'd say, Scat, can we talk about the rhythm? Oh, well, you want to know? I'd say, well, why don't we try this way? I'll go a rhythm thing, I'll do that, and you'll say, oh, that's the rhythm of the joke. And I'd say, yeah, good. So he'd read the joke, and I'd say, why don't we try it this way? And he would say, yeah, that'll work, man. All right, let's do it. So it was delightful working with him. And then when he worked as Transformer character, is an entirely different kind of character. But it was that's I think what the greatest fun in the business is the collaboration, the other guys you work with, and how you are delighted by their personalities and their talents. And we do that. We're amazed by each other all the time. It's a part of a great deal of the fun of. I'll shut up.
Tony.
Jerry, we had a basketball team.
Oh, yeah.
Talk to the microphone, talk to them, not to me.
And there was a movie studio league, Warner Brothers and MGM, Hanna-Barbera, and Disney. And on the basketball team for Hanna-Barbera was Jerry Eisenberg was our center.
No, I wasn't. I was like a guard.
Yeah.
How could you forget it?
Well, it's
Bill Joyce was the center.
Bill Joyce was the center, right. And we were on Columbia had Johnny Mathis on their team, and Jack Albertson was on the MGM team? Or?
I don't remember, but Stage 5 had, it was sponsored by Ozzie and Harriet. That was their stage.
Oh, right.
Of course, Ricky and David Nelson were on the show, on the team.
Yeah.
And the girls, they used to pack that, the gym whenever.
Disney had the best team. They won all the time, and Hanna-Barbera was at the bottom.
That's because you had limited animation.
We had yeah. It was a good, in watching that voice panel, it brought up a memory of when I first went to a recording session. Alan Dinehart took me over to a recording studio over at Columbia where they did it at the time. And it was a Flintstone recording, and I had no idea how this had ever been done, and it was just the 4 actors and Joe, and it was hilarious. It was not just the script, but the way they would keep topping each other with jokes and humor. I was cracking up in the booth, and I imagine it's a lot different now. It was just a few people, an engineer, the actors, and the director, Alan Dinehart, behind in the booth, and that was it. So I imagine it's quite different now.
You know, when the voice actors talked about Jonathan Winters, he was at the studio one time they were doing a documentary, and he'd come out at 10:30 every morning and do 45 minutes for us at the lunch truck.
Well, you remember when I was working there, I guess you weren't there at the time because you went over to Ruby Spears. I had the best office. They gave me an office that was terrific, and all the writers used to gather in there and plot against management. And when Jonathan Winters was doing the Smurfs, he'd come out of the session and he'd come to my office because he knew he could always find an audience there. And he'd walk in, and I'd say, "Are you here to fix the plumbing?" And he'd say yes, and he would do 20 minutes as a plumber. And it was amazing. It was one of the times that the studio was fun. I mean, the studio wasn't as much fun in those days. They had gotten these modular walls in there, so if they fired you, your office disappeared. They would just have to move the walls around, and literally, you couldn't find where your office had been. It was gone. It was now part of the waiting room.
Look in the hallway for your furniture.
Yeah, and then when I remember, and I shared the top office for a while with Tex Avery, who would come in there to work there, and he was like startled. And he said, "They just keep grabbing the work away from you. You finish something and they grab it away, you never see it again." And, anyway, we talked a little about the Jetsons. I really liked Top Cat. It was one of my favorite shows when I was a kid. That I really loved that show, and they'll still hold up really well. They're still good. Still good shows.
That was a good show.
Tony, I believe you started Secret Squirrel, right? Yeah. Tell us how Secret Squirrel came about.
Well, it was an obvious parody of the James Bond craze that was going on then. It was a simple little script.
Now, with a show like that, would you have the voice in mind when you designed the character, when you wrote the thing?
No, I generally had nothing to do with voices, but the actors would have a lot to do with how I would write. I got to know what Dawes did, and he could, what voice, he just knew him so well. He could write to his abilities, and to a lesser extent other actors, but it was, everything was sort of derivative, voices, scripts, stories, all like Flintstones were the Honeymooners, Top Cat was Bilko. Joe, he liked to copy, but a good copy is better than a lousy original.
I asked Mark about Garfield. I didn't know Mark until about a year ago. He mentioned that he had been I said, "You were Hanna-Barbera?" That was after I'd been fired. Which I actually was. Bill hired me and Joe fired me. It was kind of a nice bookending of my career. But I had a thought there. I was trying to think. Oh, yeah. I was asking you about your directing Garfield.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you wrote for the characters. And so that they came in and they were playing themselves and you had written for them. And it's an interesting, he has an approach of let them do what they do. They're going to bring the story to life. And I've always had shows like Transformers where it has many 16, on one show he had 18 actors. And actors basically would rather not be directed. I don't mean that they need direction, they need story direction, but they'd rather be allowed to do the characters without a lot of critiquing. And when I had a large cast like that, Jim Cummings, you probably have heard of him many times. He's in Disney's...
Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, he plays Pooh, doesn't he?
Yes.
What happens when you don't remember names?
You forget.
Anyway, where was I going with that? Mr. Cummings said, Wally, this is a Transformer show, he said, you're not letting me create a character. And I wanted to, I didn't quite come back with this. I said, we haven't time to discuss character. You're going to do it my way, and that's the way it's going to be done. I didn't do that, but that was basically, I said, I don't have time to discuss character. On stage, you do that. You work with an actor. Would you rather come through, do your line off screen or on stage or off stage? In movies, or rather TV shows, you kind of have to speed that and hit your marks and do what the director wants to do in order to get it done. Movies, you have a chance to sit around and talk about character. It's interesting. In a cartoon show, you get 4 hours to do 125 lines of dialogue and really not much time to talk about how do you feel about this character. And the director's job is, in my view, with a large cast like that, is to say this is how the character is going to be. He's going to be gruff, or he's going to be... everybody knows who Optimus Prime is, I think, the lead in Transformers. I just remember the audition for this. Peter Cullen came in, and I was kind of pushing him to be kind of a gruff, tough son of a bitch. And he said, Wally, I got 30 promos to do this afternoon for NBC. You're ripping my throat. So I said, well, what if we backed off and just made him cool, just made him smooth? He doesn't get angry, never yelled at anybody. He said, boy, that works for me. And he's been doing it for 30 years.
That's great. I would like to listen to this for a long time, but we're going to have to get out of here in a moment. I am doing a panel tomorrow in room, this one. At 1:30 tomorrow about writing for animation. I'll be discussing my dubious career and how you could get your dubious career and things like that. And we'll talk more about the cartoon business. Would you join me in thanking Mr. Wally Burr, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Benedict,